Hi, everyone. This is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy, and today's presentation is an interview with Rick Stockton. Rick lives in the great state of Texas, and he is a mechanical engineer that helps with design of our medical devices, and I've referred him to a couple of clients to try to help them with mechanical design. And he was telling me a great story about risk management and facilitating a risk management activity at a company. And I've heard many times different clients having difficulty facilitating their risk management activities and having them be productive exercises. So I really like this story, and I thought it would be a great topic for an interview. So that's why we have Rick on today. But before we get into this, I just want to sort of set the context. One of the things that I see in medical device companies, because I do the regulatory side and the quality system side, is I see design engineers that have to provide risk management documentation, but wait until the very end of the project to create it, rather than using it as a tool at the front end of the process to help them design the device and identify areas of, that might be problems with the design that they have to develop a solution for. So it's intended that risk management should be an input to the design project, not a piece of paper that you produce at the end of the project. Um, those are just the window dressings that really don't matter so much except to the regulators. We really want to make these be value-added activities. So having Rick's insight on somebody that actually designs devices and how he approaches risk management, I think will be really helpful. But before I get into his introduction here, he used an acronym a couple of times while we were just chatting in the beginning before we started this session. And I'm familiar with ISO, I'm familiar with AMI, ANSI, all these different standards in the company or the standards organization that creates them. Another one is IEC for electrical. But I think you mentioned AIG, and if I remember correctly, that's automotive. Can you tell us a little bit more about AIG standards?
Oh, AIAG is basically the Automotive Industry Action Group, and when I was in automotive, which would have been up till the late '90s, they were the ones who were responsible for putting together the standards for all three automotive groups. They probably had something to do with the 23-point QS 9000 system, and they actually had classes, instructions, and textbooks in design and process FMEAs.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for me, because that was a standard I wasn't familiar with, and being the regulatory guy, that's just embarrassing. So thank you for
It's
educating me.
autos.
And now why don't you give us a little introduction to your company, what you do, and what kind of clients you work with, and then we'll get into a couple of your slides, and we'll open the floor to questions for everybody. But the main purpose here for everybody is ask questions, and this is a recorded session, so don't please avoid sharing your video, and please don't share confidential information. You can always set up a meeting with Rick or myself if you want to ask confidential questions. Thank you.
Okay, my company is we're really a two-person design team. I do most of the technical design. I've got somebody who takes care of all of my government forms and taxes and things like that. That's my wife. She's the other end of us. And one of the great superpowers that we have is I have a lot of good friends. When I've been working on a project, I've been able to bring in everything from metallurgists to advanced analysis to additional mechanical designers to app writers, software people, electrical engineers, all kinds of things. And so that's being fairly well networked is one of the advantages that I bring. The other thing that I'll bring to my customers is that for 15 years, I was a process engineer, manufacturing engineer, worked in quality. For a short time, I was a quality manager of a small plant out in Oklahoma. That's some of my background. And all the time I was trying to get into design, but I sort of started in the wrong place, and it took a long time to get to where I wanted to be. Finally, just before the 21st century, I got my first design job, or I got my first job where I'd be trained for that. And right in 1999, had my very first design job ever. I did that until about 11 years ago, and I've been working on my own. I work with companies are that are generally small. They sometimes don't have any design engineers at all, or they have a young and capable person, and they need somebody to come in and do some of the more advanced things. These companies may only have a dozen people in them or three, but they've usually all got their funding and they're ready to go. They just need expertise. And they want to be able to know that at the end of all this, they're going to have something that will not only work, but will be able to be reproduced reliably online and will be a reasonable cost. And all those things are design functions at this phase. And I help them make sure that when they present their product, it meets all three of those criterion, and you'll recognize that as the quality triangle, and that's what my business does.
Thank you, Rick. Why don't you give us a little intro here to, for those of us that don't know what an FMEA, I'm betting you have a slide in here that'll tell us a little bit.
I do, and let me find it. I'll just go right to that slide. If you've ever seen...
And it's not the same as FEMA, so don't say design FEMA. That's FEMA, and that's the evil government organization that doesn't understand how to handle hurricanes.
Yeah, this is, and I've heard them called FEMAs, I've heard them called FMEAs, I've heard them called all kinds of things. Let's see. That's the easiest way to get to that. But if you've ever seen a form that looks remotely like this, you'll know that you're looking at an FMEA. Usually, they're nice enough to, somewhere near the top, have FMEA or potential failure mode and effects analysis. And basically, what this is a systematic way. In the case of a process, you're looking at your manufacturing. In the case of design, you're looking at a systematic way to take a look at what the risks are. And in its most complicated or elemental form, it looks about like this. And we're working primarily on the left side of this chart. We identify what we're talking about. We look at how in the world it's going to fail. That's called the failure mode. We're looking at the consequences of that. Once we know the consequences, we have a severity rating from 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, 10 being disaster. In medical terminology, if you were using a 10-point system, 10 would be fatality without warning. Probably your 7 and 8 would be some kind of injury and things like that. And it goes down to a 1 or a 2, which is a nearly unnoticeable nuisance or a procedural variation. And so we're looking at severity. How bad is it? Should it happen? Maybe it won't happen, but if it does, how bad is it? Second thing is, we try and look at the cause. Well, what occurred to make that happen? Did a wall crack? Did some tape tear? Did a pin bend? What was the actual cause of it failing in this way? Again, our failure mode. And once we are looking at the cause, we're trying to go, well, how often is that going to happen? Is it going to happen 1 out of 1,000,000, 1 out of 10,000? You can actually define these terms before you go in, which is something we can visit later if a question leads us there. But basically, you have also a 1 to 10 factor for occurrence. Of course, 10 would be it's occurring very, very frequently, which usually for almost any kind of anything that you're doing, if you've got the potential, if you've got something that is very likely, then what you're saying is during the design process, it's likely that I'm going to design something that's faulty. Okay, I have a very good chance using this kind of cause, with this kind of cause in mind, and this kind of problem, and this kind of consequence in this kind of system, we're going to have a really depressing occurrence. So we're very likely to design a faulty part. Over here, we're looking at what are the design controls. And you've all seen all kinds of design controls. If you're electrical engineers, you've seen, well, they want some kind of a circuit. Well, they build test boards, they do all kinds of things. They're theoretical design controls. In mechanics, we have finite element analysis, we have tolerance analysis, we have all those kinds of things. And if we do that, if we do those things, we're actually much less likely to design a bad part, a part that does not perform for us, a part that has some kind of a consequence, some kind of a failure. And so our design controls are those kind of things that we can put into our system. And we also have, conveniently, a 1 to 10 system here. These three numbers, at the lowest being 1 times 1 times 1, are all multiplied in the RPM. And the RPM is the risk priority number. And so what we do is, the higher the number, of course, the more risk there is. The largest number you could possibly have is 10 times 10 times 10, 1,000. And the smallest you could have is 1 times 1 times 1, or 1. And so you have a pretty wide rating of systems, and we can use this to prioritize where we are most at risk in designing a product. If we find a solution, and I'll zip through this real fast, if we find a solution, it'll be a recommended action. If we had a real, oops, didn't mean to go all the way over there. Let's see if we can get this back. There we go. If we have some sort of an action, if we have some sort of thing that we can take, something that we can introduce into the design that will positively affect it, it will either make it more detectable so that we can always realize if we're designing something bad before we're done with the design, or if we can make it less likely to occur, or, and I got a very good question or two on this, is there anything that you can do when you're working in a design to actually affect the severity? The answer to that is yes. So we're looking at, this is administrative. This is who's going to do it, when's it due, because what we're doing is we're tracking a solution. There are other documents that more elaborately and thoroughly track solutions, but this is just our abbreviation. If this was a real chart, I might have a link to the document that was tracking the actual solution to this problem. The action taken, this would be what we actually did, and then you revisit these three numbers to see how they're affected. Then you have a new RPM, and this new RPM, if this was any kind of a good action, is significantly lower than the RPM we had here. Any questions?
I wanted to make a few comments. So Rick and I were both trained around the same time in the same industry. I was trained in the late 90s by the automotive industry. I worked for a company that made fuel systems. And so, as he said, severity was always a 10 because car would blow up and person would die. So in that aspect, we're certainly the same for our backgrounds. When I get to the medical device industry, I was kind of appalled at how primitive some of the risk management activities were. And it was very clear that the medical device industry was behind other industries in their risk analysis, both the chemical industry, pharmaceutical industry, and the automotive industry. So even though we make devices that save lives, they really didn't, their systems weren't as strong. In 2007, they revised the 14971 standard for risk management. And one of the revisions that they made was they made a comment in the annex, it's in Annex G of the 2007 version, stating that detectability should only be used for design if it's proactive. And what they mean by that is if the person detects that something is going to cause harm or is causing harm, when they have it in their hands and they're ready to use it, it's too late. That's not proactive. If you detect on the production line that something's wrong, that's a proactive measure. So inspections at incoming inspection, in-process inspection, final inspection are things that are proactive. I've seen a lot of companies say that, well, we're going to use detection in design and we're going to have it be our verification and validation activities. And our verification and validation activities will detect these things. But that's not really what they mean in the standard. And so when you start talking with regulators and regulatory consultants that specialize in risk management and understanding the standard, interpreting it, you talk to somebody that was on the committee like Edwin Bills or something, you're going to have a very purist interpretation of what these things mean. But keep in mind, all these things were in the annexes at the end and in the guidance, and they're not necessarily wrong. They're just not what they meant. What they meant is you shouldn't be using detectability to reduce your design risks or your RPN scores when it's not something that can be done prior to delivery to the customer. And you can interpret that a lot of different ways. And some companies keep the detection column out of their design FMEAs because of this. Some companies include it here, which is the more classic way to do this. Is it right or wrong? Depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to somebody that feels very strongly about this and they're a regulatory consultant, you're probably wasting your breath to try to convince them that they're wrong and you're right. But one of the things you can expect from that kind of person is they're going to expect somewhere on this FMEA for you to document where your verification and validation test reports are that provide that evidence and have some traceability to that. Traceability to the records that show that this actually worked is something they look for and they need in order to say, yes, your design is acceptable and your risk management activities are acceptable. So just writing over here a brief description of recommended actions and action taken is not really enough for a regulator. Somewhere you're going to have to say, this is where the validation report is. This is where the verification report is. And it really depends on how you're going to document these things. But as we get more and more complex devices, I think the whole entire industry is going to eventually come to the realization that an Excel spreadsheet is not the way to do this for an electromedical device or some complex device that has software, because there's too many things to put rows and columns in and to try to document all the verification and validation reports that you need traceability to. You really need a database where you click on a hyperlink and it takes you to the document you want, and you can generate an automated report of some of these things. So you'll hear somebody say, well, you can't do it this way, you can do it this way, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. These are all tools, and the tools are mentioned in the annexes at the back of a standard. The standard is guidance, the annexes are guidance for the guidance. And so to say, this is how you shall do it, and it came down from high above, and you'll be smite down with a bolt of lightning if you don't do it that way, is not the case. So people need to get over that a little bit. Some people say, well, you did this wrong because you have severity on a 5-point scale and it should be on a 10-point scale. Well, there also isn't any rule about that either, and you won't be smite for that either. But just take that particular example. Why would you make it a 10-point scale versus a 5-point scale? A lot of people tell me, well, it's a 10-point scale because that's the way I was taught and that's the way we've always done it. That's an honest answer, maybe not the best answer, but it's an honest answer. I actually participated in a group where we were trying to figure out what is the best way to do a risk management activity? What is the best way to do design? And what are all the problems you guys experience? Because we were all experienced and had done this before. And one of the comments was, we spent a whole lot of time arguing over whether it's a 4 or a 5. And on a 10-point scale, who cares? You know, 8, 9, 10, it's a serious injury and I have to report it to the FDA because it's a reportable. A 1 or a 2, I'm not going to worry about. And a 4 or a 5, it's somewhere in the middle. So using a 5-point scale instead of a 10-point scale reduces the amount of time you spend in the conference room arguing with people that you work with. So that's why I vote for the 5-point scale. So sometimes some of this stuff needs to be practical, but you will get very different perspectives. There is no place in the standard you can say this is the way it shall be done and you're doing it wrong. It's if your procedure says the word shall and you don't do it that way, well, then you just hung yourself with your own rope. So some of these are just think carefully about what you write in your procedures and leave yourself some wiggle room. As the first auditor I ever was audited by said, whenever you write these procedures, don't always use shall and must, because that just gives you a rope to hang yourself with. And I'm the guy here that's going to pull the rope. So I thought that was good advice. And when people look at this and they think, oh, Rick doesn't know what he's doing, he doesn't do it the way we've been told to do it. Just because he does it differently doesn't mean it's wrong. This is a classic FMEA, and it is different from my FMEA, but it's exactly the way I was trained on how to do it. And there are a whole lot more people out there in the world doing it exactly the way Rick is showing us here than there are people doing it the way I actually give people templates. I give people templates without the detection column. I give people columns to the right that have things like where's the validation report, where's the verification report, where is um, the reference in the IFU for any residual risks. But these are things I put in there to help the regulators in a 510K or a CE marking submission. And they're different from what the classic FMEA says you're supposed to do. It's not wrong, it's not better, it's just the way I do it. And so um, don't crucify Rick or me for doing things differently. I invite him here as a guest to show people uh, how to do an FMEA and maybe facilitate the meetings. And the best thing to do right up front is to agree on a form and agree on a method, agree on scores for each of the rankings. So everybody on the team doesn't argue about those things. You should have agreement on how you're going to do it in the scorings before you walk in the room, or it's going to be a really long day. Does that help you a little bit there, Rick?
Oh yeah, and it reminds me of a couple of things. Which, if you are putting together, if you are fortunate / unfortunate enough to be leading an FMEA team, a couple of things to know. One is that as you're going through some of these conclusions, it's really a great idea if you can, probably jumping way ahead, it's a great idea if you can table a number. Let's say that you've got most of in a 10-point system, for instance, things are usually done in dyads, more or less serious versions of one thing or the other. Sometimes you can just say, well, you know what? Let's just go ahead and put a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's go ahead and put a 6 on here, or a 7, and we can think about it overnight. And if we have a reason, and if someone has a reason why the risk is reduced, go ahead and bring it into our next meeting. When I say next meeting, what do I mean? Well, when I was the last FMEA job that I was brought into, the introduction went something like this. Well, you know, we've met for 2 days, and I don't know if they were consecutive days or if it took them 3 days to finally convince all the company's top technical staff to get in the same room and lock themselves in for another 8 hours while they wrangled over a spreadsheet displayed up on the wall. And the problem was that nobody wanted to do it. Everybody had other things to do. And when you break it down the right way, a lot of the work is administrative. So when I came in, we had 1-hour meetings, and we would concentrate on just the information. We'd even have a little bell that went off when we were 10 minutes from being over, so everybody could know to wrap things up and get everything written down. And then I would take all these messy notes, and it would take me 2 or 3 hours sometimes, but I'd go ahead and get them together. And if you do have somebody really disputing over something, one of the best things to do is say, you know what, let's discuss that. Let's discuss that at the 10-minute bell, and we can get it wrangled out as best we can. I was also volunteered a number of years ago, back in the late 90s, to lead an 11-hour-long quality meeting. And it wasn't my department. I was just the guy who took a step backwards last. And so I got chosen to go ahead and do this. And so I thought, what in the world am I going to do? So I just pulled all the tricks together that I could. And anytime somebody would come up with a rabbit trail or something like this, or somewhere where they wanted to really get into an incredible amount of detail, which I'm sure would have been fascinating. But keep in mind, at these meetings, we ordered 2 meals, okay? We ordered lunch, and then we ordered dinner, and we kept on going. And for us to get it down to 6 or 7 hours seemed like an impossibility. But most of the work was just anything that I hadn't put on the agenda or anything that was extra, say, you know what, that's a good point. I'm writing that down, and at the end of the meeting, you know, if we haven't resolved it by then, we'll go through it. Well, everybody was kind of too hungry. So we ended up quitting before dinner. And a lot of times, the subsequent conversation will take care of it. And if that doesn't work, if you're leading one of these things, a lot of times the best thing to do is get all, you know, we're probably talking, you know, your 4 or 5 or 6 most highly paid technical people, including a warranty guy, at least one person from quality, because very often you'll have a quality manager, assistant quality manager, but you'll also have a technician who is pulling all the numbers. And it may work that way with a warranty too. You'll have 1 or 2 or 3 engineers, depending on what you're doing. You'll probably have somebody from production, unless the team has lost its sanity completely, because that person will add a lot of perspective. And then you may have 1 or 2 other engineers in the room also. So while you're doing all that stuff, you really want to use their time. So you're trying to get all the information that you can. You know how to do FMEAs, you know your discipline, you know your company's product, but you don't have to even really know the product very well, because the people on the team getting you the information are going to tell you all about it. So what you do is you put it into some kind of order according to a succinct set of rules and according to a fixed perspective, and you lay that out for them, and you send that to them the night before. They all get to look at it, and they all show up with red line versions, and you get to the facts so much quicker. And you end up using less than a day to go through a long FMEA, maybe only 2 or 3 or 4 meetings to get through an entire thing from nowhere. And I'm going to silence this phone. Pretty well. That's something everybody should do before a meeting. And that's the ultimate silence. It's turning off. Okay. So if you're in a situation like that, one of the best things to do is defer a point to later in the meeting, when you'll probably have the question answered, and to go ahead and make sure that you're just concentrated on the things that only they can do, and then you can retreat for 2 or 3 hours to do the things that they don't need to be around for. One of the biggest complaints that I got was everybody's sitting around while whoever's putting the spreadsheet together is making it look all nice and putting everything in order. They don't need to be around for that. You need their knowledge and experience. You need the things that they can give you. And that's why our process worked out so well. That's why our FMEA process changed from, well, let me see, we got about, we spent 2 complete days and got about 5 lines done. And they needed several pages to get through their product. It was fairly simple. But the other thing that you're going to find out, and that is that the way that I've got up on the screen, the way I was originally trained, may be one of the best ways to look at it. But you want to do 2 things. You want to talk to whoever is giving you regulatory advice, and you want to make sure that you know, according to the latest standards and according to the standards that are being used for your product in your company, what they're going to want to mean by these things. You're going to want to know what to do with detection. You're going to want to know if the detection is going to be defined by, can it be detected before it gets out of the plant? Or are we talking about detections during the design process? And you're going to want to make sure that you understand those things and you understand the ground rules before you go. Because the asylums are filled, jam-packed with people who tried to combine design FMEAs and process FMEAs into the same thing. I saw people do that. You can't reach them anymore because, people who are being treated for depression in those institutional settings don't have phones. So it is, understand that when you're working with a design FMEA, the assumption is that the processes are functioning. The assumption is that the processes have been set up so this can be built. And when you're working with a process FMEA, you are assuming that the design will work. Don't think that there aren't design solutions to process problems and process solutions to design issues that you can't get over, because there are. But if you don't make those 2 assumptions when you're working on one or the other, then you'll join all those other poor unfortunate people being treated for various mental diseases incurred while trying to combine those 2 things. If you don't believe me, try it, but have a friend with you. Anyway, that's all for that so far.
I kind of railroaded your presentation at the beginning. The title that you had here was Painless FMEAs.
Yes.
And anybody that has suffered as much as one of my employees, Matthew Walker, on his first FMEA that he had to really lead, I think he was just one step away from the asylum. And he was taking an old one and trying to fix it, and they of course had combined process and design. So just to set the record straight, a process FMEA is used to make sure the product meets the specification. The design FMEA is to make sure the specification won't kill you. So I'll repeat that. The process FMEA is to make sure the production will make a product that meets your specifications, and the design FMEA is to make sure the specifications won't kill you. And so there are two different FMEAs for two different purposes. They might even be made by different teams. They might look different, but don't try to combine them because you think you're saving yourself paperwork, because they have two totally different purposes. And when we're submitting a 510K, we don't submit risk management for the most part, except for software. So you might not need anything for the 510K. If you're doing CE marking, you typically are providing design FMEAs, and when they start looking at these process FMEAs is when they come in on site and look at your production process controls and do an FDA inspection. So they look at them in different times, they look at them from different perspectives, and there are different people doing them. So even though they both end in the same 4-letter acronym, they are not the same. So keep that in mind. But now, please tell us how Matthew could have made his first FMEA painless, because I certainly failed in making his first FMEA painless. But at least now he's paying attention as closely as humanly possible because he doesn't want to repeat the experience.
Okay, there are a few easy steps, and I'll take as many questions as you have on any of the steps. But the first thing is, you want to have somebody, if you can, have somebody who is not a contributor, not one of your key contributors, be the person who is coordinating the meeting. That person's job is secretary. And it's kind of a complicated technical secretary. I don't think you could do it coming out of secretarial school, because you have to know your FMEAs. You want to be a fairly decent technical person. You want to have a relatively organized mind, and you have to like people no matter who they are, because you get all kinds in these meetings. But they're always capable. They always know what's going on. They always have an opinion. So you want to combine that. Okay, next thing you want to do is you want to establish a fixed perspective. What do I mean by that? Well, the best way that I can illustrate it is using airplanes. You'll find I use airplanes or cars to illustrate just about everything. It gets bad when we're talking about relationships, but that's not today's subject. So let's say that we're looking at an airplane. How high is he going to fly? Well, let's say she's looking out the window and all she sees is little dots. Well, you have to admit that pilot, she has got a huge overall view. She has got a global view of what's going on. A little less on the details. Maybe that's not a great place to fly. Let's say that whatever you're doing, you have to see what's on the ground. Well, you have to fly lower for that. Okay. But you don't want to fly too low, because, then number one, you've landed, you can't go anywhere. You're running into things. You're too close to what's going on for you to do any good. So let's say that we've got something like something relatively simple. I'm going to go to bicycles. We've got a bicycle wheel. I ride every day, so there we go. I've got a bicycle wheel, and you're trying to figure out, well, how should I look at this thing? Well, do I want to look at it from the point of view of the bicycle? Does the bicycle work? Well, yeah, you actually might want to. You definitely wouldn't want to get to the altitude of looking at it, the bicycle manufacturer or the bicycle store. If something goes wrong, how does it affect their sales? That gets really esoteric. You want to be a little closer to the ground than that. And that is actually one of the biggest and most important decisions that you make. And if you find that your altitude isn't quite right, it's one of the most important course corrections that you do going through. Because if you're looking at the design problems that a single ball bearing could have that is buried inside that wheel, then and you're looking at everything from that perspective, if you start working out those problems and you start looking at those failure modes, they may not make a whole lot of sense in the overall design. You may actually want to assume that a bearing is either good or bad, and you're not looking at the ball bearings because you're really looking at the wheel level or at the bicycle level. And I hope I haven't been too unclear on that, but your actual perspective not only needs to be established, but you want to make sure that thing does not change. You want to look at the entire system through that, which actually gets into another one of the really good questions that we had, but I won't hit it right now. The third thing that you want to do, and this is the thing that doing that makes it easy on you and it makes it easy on everybody contributing. What you'll find is that everything that gets contributed, you may need to retranslate it a little bit to make sure that you're seeing it from, you know, the wheel level perspective of this, the bicycle wheel level or the bicycle level. Somebody in warranty may give you a number that really looks a lot more like it would relate to a sales number or inventory number or something like that. You know, a damaged part causes inventory to go down and all this kind of stuff. You may have to, as they're giving that to you, you know, write it down diligently, take it home or take it back to your office and translate that into something that is what that failure mode, what that particular problem would be from the view of how does this bicycle roll down the street, okay? And I've been saying, look at it, write it down, then take it back to your cubicle or take it back to your house or doing whatever. What do I mean by that? The other way to make an FMEA a lot more painless, and this makes it more painless for the rest of the team, because it shortens the amount of time that they have to spend at any one given time. You know, because you do have the coffee limit, the donut limit, and the bladder limit. You need to observe all of those protocols. But when you're only meeting for an hour, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So that's how long my groups meet. And I just suck in all the facts like a vacuum cleaner, like a giant fish net. You know, I got tin cans, I got squids, I got some good bass in there and things like that. And I got all that stuff. And I take it home and I sort it all out. I don't make everybody sit around while I pull the tin cans and the squids and throw them back in and just try and find some good sea bass in there. You know, I don't do that to them. I take it home and I sort all that stuff out. I get it as sorted out as I can. I send it to them in an email or give them a link where they can look it up. And then we meet the next day or in a couple of days and go over it. What these guys were doing is they were trying to do all of that stuff simultaneously at one time and sitting there and really just pushing through it. But what was happening was most of the people weren't doing anything. I bet half the group was checking their email most of the time. And you don't want to have that. You want to have something where they're able to just throw the group in. If they'll allow you, record it, because it doesn't hurt them for you to listen to it twice. But those are the principal tools that you use to take a long, drawn-out, horrible FMEA process. And in the case of Mr. Walker, the other thing that you'd want to do, which I did not have to do on the last FMEA job that I did, is say, is this going to be a design FMEA or is this going to be a process FMEA? And that is I don't like to have a lot of rules, but that's a rule. If they say, well, we want to do both, then you say, is this going to be a design FMEA or a process FMEA? And if you want to, you can explain to them the whole theory of how this goes until they either tire of your explanation or believe you. Whichever works, it's fine. Okay. But you want it to be one or the other.
Let me, I wrote down each of those four in the chat and see if I got them right here. So the first one is appoint a secretary that's not the key person in the meeting. Number two, establish a fixed perspective, i.e. what altitude is your plane at? Number three, make sure everything is translated into the fixed perspective. And four, shorten the time for everyone in the meeting by taking the information from a 1-hour meeting home and sorting it out. This reduces utilization of precious donut, coffee, and bladder resources.
Now, I do okay? It's not complicated. Yeah.
Okay.
That is I just gave away my trade secret. There it is. Now you know.
We'll put it in a book and we'll put your name on it and we'll sell it for lots of money.
Yeah.
Matthew's going to probably comment on this at some point and tell us some of his pains or ask us how to fix them. But Mary had a really good question here. that gets a little bit off the topic of managing the meeting and more into one of the things that's a regulatory requirement, and that is, does Rick have any guidance in determining acceptable risk? And before I let you answer, I know that they have two guidances now instead of one. It used to be just 14971. Now we have 24971, which is where they put most of the annexes that were in 14971. And they have a section in there just on acceptability of risk and how to determine that. And they give you even some examples. But one of the things that they have in there, thank you to the Europeans, is acceptability when given the state of the art. So we're going to have, when you get into medical devices, you have a lot of definitions, and you will have to figure out ahead of time what is the state of the art. So you're supposed to, as an input to design, to go out there and investigate what the other devices are and do what they call a state of the art review to determine these are the other devices that are currently used on the market and considered sort of the gold standard for doing this procedure. And this is what is acceptable for risks in those products. And we shouldn't make a product that's worse. And that should be one way you look at acceptability of risk, is do the state of the art review, determine what acceptable risk is based on state of the art, and then make your product as safe or safer. And that's not how a lot of people approach things. And the European system is different from the US. In the US, one of the ways the FDA has articulated that same argument in different terms recently is, if you have a predicate that's made in the 70s or 80s or 90s, it's probably not state of the art. And maybe we don't want you using that as a predicate anymore. So we're now saying at the FDA, if you have a predicate that's more than 10 years old, you need to get permission from us to use that. And people are like, well, why can't I find this 510K summary anymore? Because it's more than 10 years old. They're making those disappear. So,
Ouch.
that's part of the deal. So if you can't find the 510K summary and you can't find what the indications were, there's a reason for it. It's because they don't want you using it anymore. So use something more recent, and make sure that your technology is current. So, don't use two sticks to create a fire if you have matches.
Yeah.
Or a lighter. So tell us, what do you have for us that might help us with acceptability of risk, or how you have handled that in one of these design FMEAs?
Well, good news and bad news. The good news is that a lot of the things I do have to do with being able to get right in and actually determine what the problems are and do the analysis. What do I mean by that? Wouldn't anything be an analysis? Wouldn't anything be good enough? If I was looking at the European requirement, it would actually and doing it using the old system, but including the European requirement, that would actually be a design control, believe it or not. It would be one of the things that I do to make sure. One other way to look at a design FMEA is looking at it as the process of designing something. And you're looking at the process of particular things because you're actually naming those kind of things. So you're not just talking about the design process in general. But one of the good news things is that what the Automotive Industry Action Group came up with was a very elemental way to look at design and to be able to do it from an engineering level and not doing it from, say, a marketing level. Now there are simpler analysis results. Now we're changing from good news to bad news. So let's say that we're taking what you're looking at and we say, okay, well, that's fine, except we don't want to have a 10-point system. We want to have a 5-point system. We want to combine severity and occurrence and not use detection. And we want to have a little bitty table. We don't want to use any math. That's actually a new method that the industry is looking at. And we want to just have 3 levels of severity resulting from 3 levels of whatever, and we just want to combine all this stuff. Some of the best things to do, and we're going, well, that's how we want to do it this year, and then in 2 years, who knows how we'll do it? You know, who knows what the industry will say. If I was going to do something like that, my best shot would probably be doing something on this level to where you'd have the information and in some columns over to the right side of the chart. And they would be, if I was doing something like this, depending on what I was doing, I might depart from something like an Excel spreadsheet and use something that was a whole lot more friendly to links and linking documents and things like that. I've actually thought of creating one on OneNote. I've actually thought of creating it in Word, or actually just going to straight to a database. But if I was looking at some columns over to the right, they might be simplified and combined versions of this. But what I've noticed about some of the new systems is they're much simpler, but you can't look at the system and figure out how to improve it. It just sort of gives you a result. You know, you sort of get coffee with cream and sugar. And you're going like, yeah, but I want to change the sugar that I want to use. I don't want to use the refined sugar. I want to use the sugar rate from the cane, just minimally processed. Well, no. It's coffee with cream and sugar. That's what the result says. Well, you'd want to go back into something a little bit more detailed if you wanted to say, I would like to tweak detection, or I want to be looking a little bit more at occurrence, or the magical silver bullet. What if a design change could change severity, which it can, which is just a hoot. That's where I get into nerdly happiness over this kind of stuff, is actually making design changes that alter severity. What if I could do those kind of things? Well, when I start thinking those thoughts, I want to go back into something where I have a little bit more room to work. But at the same time, we may have to express our results in something very much simpler. And so you have to be ready to do that. Unfortunately, all you have to know is a little about logic functions and some math and things like that in Excel or whatever database you're using, and you're there, you're fine. You can create a system that will do it. So hopefully I haven't gotten too far off course, but you will find that you have to do some adapting to be able to come up with a result in the format that the current standard and administration of your company requires. Did I miss a lot of stuff there?
No, I think you covered it really well. I've seen a lot of companies, they'll say, well, this is the highest RPN score we can have for acceptable risk. And as the auditor, you're trained to say, well, how did you come up with that number? It's not, do you have a number? It's not, did you determine acceptability? Because those are yes or no questions. Like, how did you come up with that number? I'm like, that H question. I don't know how to answer how. We just did it. I don't want to relive that experience. I'm still on the Prozac.
It felt good.
So one of the things that I did when I was training Matthew on FMEA is I said, well, this particular product, the worst thing that is likely to happen from this product is you get an infection. And so it's a sterile product to try to reduce that. That's the major design control in this device. We sterilize it so it can't cause an infection. And it was a wound treatment product. So we're looking at it and said, well, if you take severity of a non-sterile product, they could get an infection, they could die. So we could say it's an 8, 9, or a 10, probably a 10. But the probability of that occurring is got to be pretty low because it's marked as sterile and it's got a 10 to the minus 6 sterility assurance level. And we've got all these process controls on the process side, but we're not allowed to talk about process. It's designed for a sterility assurance level of 10 to the minus 6. So I'm going to say that's a 1 on occurrence and a 10 on severity. So I got an RPN of 10 if I don't do detection. So that means I can't have anything bigger than a 10 for this device? And I said, yeah, that's why this is a class 1 product. That's why this product doesn't require a 510K.
Oh.
They're like, oh. You know, it's a Band-Aid. Hello. we're not going to need a clinical study for this because it's a Band-Aid. It's exempt for a reason. And I'm not saying that Band-Aids are necessarily class one. I'm not saying Band-Aids are necessarily exempt depending on the pathway and what the indications are and everything. You could have a class two, or you could have a 510K or not have a 510K. We won't go there. I'm just saying that if you take what everybody believes is state of the art, this is the worst thing that is likely to happen with this device, this category of devices, and you set that as the worst score that you should have on RPN. If you see a bunch of RPNs higher than that, you should be questioning that in the design process, and you should be questioning that in your risk management meeting. And it may not be the really fancy worded question that we wanted about, or answer that we wanted about acceptable risk, but it's a practical approach to the team. Like, if we have any RPN scores above this, let's discuss those. If we have any ones below that, we're probably okay. And Mary said, if something is acceptable risk, do you still have to mitigate it as far as possible? And she used the as far as possible. AFAP is the acronym. The Europeans are to blame for this one too. So tell us what you think about the as far as possible acceptable risk.
Okay, as far as possible.
You thought this was going to be the easy interview.
Oh no. This is one of the biggest reasons. Here's the other thing, and I'll give away another one of my secrets. Here's the other thing about tabling stuff and saying, and not expecting to have it look great on the chart as soon as they say it. You know, because I'll write things down, I'll leave out the numbers, I'll do all kinds of stuff. Is that it gives you a chance to present a solution. If you leave it up to a group of 8 people, you know, I was taking a leadership class, and there are 3 ways to get really good decisions. You can have a very large, relatively democratic group that operates within certain basic rules. You can get great decisions that way. You can get great decisions if you just have one person, hopefully a very wise person, doing that. You know, it's the first king rule. You know, the first king is usually good, and then everybody else just is there for the power. And the absolute way to get the slowest and most drawn out decisions that may not be very good, and that the most number of people will absolutely hate, and that will do you the most harm, is to get a group of about half a dozen or 8 or 9 or 10, 11 people to agree on anything. So the best way to do that is to get all the information down, go home, set up a logical matrix that makes sense, that's consistent with your operating rules, you know, of your FMEA and everything like that. Bring that back to them, present it, and then challenge them to prove it's wrong. I mean, if you've ever been in automotive, you've had somebody from General Motors call you to dispute your FMEA numbers, and by the time the call was done, they were agreeing with your numbers, then you're ready. You're kind of ready to do that.
I'm not sure we want to call that person the first king, but I agree with the rest of what you said.
Yeah. It's this is from ancient history that almost nobody studies anymore. But it's but one good leader can make a great decision, you know, especially if they're accountable in some way. But a group of an oligarch type group is just, it's so slow and so nasty and so bureaucratic. It's very, very tough. And so I never try to make the big decisions there. I try to lay something out for them that makes sense, that's logical, that's cohesive, that's all done from the same perspective. Remember the altitude thing, and lay that out for them. And very often they'll correct it. And if you do it very well at all, they'll come back with some more information, which is really, really useful. And they will fill in little missing pieces and perspectives. They'll discover stuff about the product they didn't know as a group as you're doing it. And now it's actually turning into not only a good design document for that product, but a good one to look at when you're looking at version 2. And that can really make a difference. In the beginning, as Rob said, when we were in the automotive industry, there were certainly a lot of people telling us to do a lot of things, I was a production engineer. We had statistics and process controls and things like that. And you know, and if you can't sleep and wake up feeling like you've done the right thing, then just don't make that decision. That's a great rule. But we certainly had a little bit of pressure to just sort of whip up documents, and so I ended up spending some late nights putting together documents that I knew I could stand behind, that were correct, even if we were providing documents where there hadn't been any before. And you want to do that for your team. You want to be able to go ahead and bring together something that's logical and it's consistent and it's well laid out and you can argue it. So one requirement for whoever is going to lead the team is you do need to know your FMEAs. You do need to understand that. You need to know them enough to know where you can be flexible and where you can't break a rule, like mixing up design and process FMEAs, trying to combine them. But that is a requirement. And you also, it helps if you love everybody, because they're all going to come up with different ideas. And if you can enjoy the process, it's so much more fun. And they know, and especially if they know that at the end of the hour they get to leave, that's perhaps the most valuable tool you can present. That 10-minute alarm or 5-minute alarm or whatever you set up, that was one of the most valuable things I ever got. I would set that before we would start a meeting, and it would, and my phone would go off, you know, and they would know, and they would know that I valued their time as much as their general manager did.
You had a few other slides that we didn't get to cover. Is there anything in there that you thought was really important that we should cover?
Oh gosh, let's see. Forgive me, I'm just going to zip through them real fast because, let's see. That's just me. You will notice that through the presentation, I have slipped through about 2 or 3 or 4 accents. I grew up in the Midwest, where we speak radio announcer English, and then grew up later through high school on the Northeast Coast, where we speak all kinds of things. And I came down to Texas, where if you guys were Texans, that's the accent that I'd be speaking in. You know, add 1 engineering degree, add 15 years of manufacturing engineering, process engineering, quality, all that stuff. This is a great thing to do, to become a designer of product that will actually work. That really helps. So that's kind of me. And let's go. Going backwards, these were just the slides. This was the last one I came up with. And this is kind of the answer to why get better at this. And I'll give you a real altruistic reason, because I really love the altruistic reasons, but they don't tend to produce direct profit. So if they're your arguments, you're probably not going to win very much. But it'll do your heart good and it'll do your mind good to just allow this to, why do we want to get better at this? Because here's a little mythical note from the general manager saying, I need my tech staff back. You know, they don't need to be tied up for an entire day in your meeting. Okay, please bring them back. You know, bring my people back, you know, and because everybody's a professional, they know the product, and we're trained in FMEAs. Hopefully they know at least what's going on, and the leader must know. Okay, and so why are they in there in a meeting for a whole day? Why did it go to 2 days? Why is it 3 days? Why are we now on 4 days? Why is everyone haggling? Why is everyone checking their email while you're straightening up the chart? Well, because you're doing it wrong. But why get better at this? Because if we don't find a way to get better at it, it takes so long that no general manager will put up with it. They put so much pressure on you to just get it done that before you know it, it just gets sent over to the most unloved quality person to go ahead and put it together by himself. And that's absolutely the wrong way to do it. I mean, it really, really is. I mean, you wouldn't even want to say that. You don't even want to say that to yourself. But who hasn't seen that done? Of course, you know, or at least heard of someone who did it. Let's just keep ourselves safe and say that. But you don't want to do it because number one, it's the wrong way to do it. You're really violating what pretty much everybody who can make your life harder tells you that you need to do. So don't do that. But the second thing is, if you don't find a decent way to do this and make it efficient, then you're going to be then you're going to be pressured into creating something that's inferior, and the only pressure will be to finish the meeting, not to actually get the analysis right. But if you've got one person who's spending more time doing it, and then you've got all your other technical people out doing the things that you pay them to do, and then you get together for another meeting, straighten it up. We got through this thing. They had spent 2 days getting like 3 or 4 lines of this thing done. But we spent, I think, 1, 2, 3, in 3 weeks we were done. And that's 2 meetings a week, 1 hour each. So I did most of the work. I certainly spent a lot more time on it. Nobody else did. And that's the secret.
It's having one person that's gathering all the information and then digesting it and sorting it and creating a final draft that everybody else can review and edit, instead
Absolutely.
of keeping the whole team hostage in a room so they can debate it.
Yep.
Every single line, every single color, every single number. If it looks like there's not going to be a consensus right away, table it, come back with a recommendation, and then have them review and edit.
Yeah. And a lot of people might say, well, isn't that taking too much on yourself? No, it's actually assuming that you're working with a high integrity group. Because a high integrity group is going to see something reasonable. But if you only have a solution halfway drawn up there on the board, they're all going to go, well, okay, yeah, but it needs to be this and this and this. And you just kind of want to say, let me finish the sentence, and this way, if you're assuming you've got a relatively high integrity group there, you can write down something that's internally consistent, that's accurate, that takes all their stuff and gets all that information in there, and they're going to agree on it at the end, or they'll help you tweak it till it's 100% exactly right. And so you'll answer and so you will be the answer. Or, if you don't have somebody free to do that, that's something that I do. But that's one of the things. I spend most of my time designing, but it happens that this is part of that job. So this is part of what I do. But get somebody to do it, because then you'll answer the first question, but that person needs to know about the structure, scope, and context, and something we went through right away, RPN factors, and this is probably one of the best things about this analysis is you will actually, you don't even have to do it perfectly. You just have to do a decent job of it, and you will actually begin to answer design questions during this. And that makes a huge difference.
We're kind of at the end of our time here. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, we've already had a few questions that have been put up on our chat box, but please put it up in the chat box if you have a question. And then you can also unmute your mic if you would like to just go ahead and ask a question for Rick. And then once we cover 1 or 2 questions here, we're going to have to let him go. And you'll be able to follow up by email or phone with Rick.
I promise I won't treat any question like it's a dumb question. So if you, ask.
I have one question here. Person was asking if you have a design FMEA meeting, does everybody in the room have to be trained on risk management before they go to this meeting? So what is your philosophy on that?
Actually, they do not. Trying to get everybody trained the same way in risk management. I'll throw something out. Let's say that you just have everybody get like a bachelor's of science in risk management. I'm kind of exaggerating for effect, but let's say they all become experts. Well, they're all just going to come in with a bunch of different opinions. You're still going to have to do it one way. What's the best thing is if they know how to do their jobs and they don't mind a 15-minute introduction on what we're doing and how we're figuring out our numbers. They won't know everything at the beginning, but what they come in knowing is they definitely know their jobs. They know what's going on in their areas, whether it's quality, engineering, warranty. They see the problems coming back in from previous products, all those kind of things. They come in with their expertise. As long as they're willing to go along with you and listen and kind of understand. Yeah, we're combining your expertise in this document so that we can move ahead with this next project.
Okay. So for as an auditor, one of the things that's in there is you have to define the training requirements. So be careful if you're going to have a cross-functional team where not everybody in the room is trained on risk management. Don't write your risk management procedure that says everybody that participates in a design FMEA has to be trained according to ISO 14971 and go take this course at I'll just pick on AAMI because we work for AAMI and we do some trainings for them. So you have to go take Rob Packard's class at AAMI on this topic. Don't write your procedures that prescriptive. Yes, you need somebody that is signing and approving the risk management that's trained on risk management. That you need. But not everybody you ask an opinion of and everybody that participates in some fashion in the design and risk management process needs the same level of training. In fact, that's why we have cross-functional teams, because people are bringing other things to the table, such as their knowledge of medicine, or maybe their knowledge of how to repair the unit and what goes wrong with the units. So you need that other perspective. I haven't got any other questions that popped up, and we're past the top of the hour here, or top of the half hour here. So it's 6 minutes past. So I'm going to stop the recording here, and if anybody has any questions, don't forget you can contact Rick. He has his email at the bottom of the slides. His phone number is also down there, which is sort of hidden by the video. So you can contact Rick by email or phone. And we're going to save this recording and post it on our YouTube channel for Medical Device Academy. So don't forget to visit our YouTube channel and like and subscribe, because that's how all our free webinars, we make them available through our YouTube channel now. And if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, then you'll get updates to any new webinars that we've conducted. And everybody always asks, is this going to be available for recording because I'm in a different time zone or I missed it? Yes, it's always going to be available as a recording, whether you pay for it or whether it's a free session like this, it'll still be recorded and we will make it available. But this one will be on our YouTube channel because it's a free one. So thank you very much, Rick. And we really appreciated having you come on today and talk about risk management. And I think just reading a couple of the things in the chat, I really think a couple of people got a lot out of this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Fun questions too.
Thank you. Have a great day, Rick.
You too.
Bye-bye.